Hello, everybody. Welcome to, I think this is the last session today, in this tent anyway. I'm just going to do a brief introduction. I'm going to sort of semi-chair this. We're going to sort of have a couple of very small presentations from the two speakers. I'll introduce them briefly. And then hopefully we can engage you as the audience with questions and anything you want to fire at us. So if I just introduce who we are. My name's Pete Richardson. I'm a commercial grower of 30 years. Field scale crops, got up to about 30 acres, 470 boxes at one point, and a lot of tunnels. And also I'm the chair of the Organic Growers Alliance. So I should just mention the Organic Growers Alliance. We essentially, we're a membership organisation representing growers all over the UK, 400 members, all mainly commercial growers. I wouldn't say exclusively commercial growers, but mainly we cater for commercial growers, giving technical help. We do guided, tours of farms, and we have a conference, and we have a very, very good magazine. And if you'd like to have a magazine at the end, please take one. They're just to represent. That's not the current one, but it gives you an idea of the sort of technical excellence of that magazine. So I'll just briefly tell you why this has come about, this session. Essentially, what happened, I bumped into my friend John Cherry, who owns the farm here and set up Groundswell with his brother Paul. I was at university with John, and it's the first time I came last year, and I rather jokingly said, "Where's the horticulture, John?" And he pointed at a pile of manure with some potatoes in it, and I said, "John, you're joking, aren't you?" we need to have a horticulture conversation with regen, and essentially there's a lot of regen, in my opinion. We can discuss it, but there's a lot of regen within what we do in organic horticulture, obviously. So although we are three organic growers here, obviously we could expand the conversation to generally to horticulture generally. We don't have to talk about just organic, but we are an organic organisation. So what we'll do is, I think we'll have 5 minutes or 10 minutes from Jim, and maybe 10 minutes from Guy, and then we'd like to open it up and get some feedback from you and maybe some questions and what you want to talk about. Obviously that's the title, which I hope they'll be keeping to vaguely, but we don't have to necessarily. There's a massive debate at the moment. I've just come off the back of the Mumbio, sort of, I wouldn't call it a rant, but it's certainly, it explores some very interesting areas, including, obviously, Tolly's system at Pangbourne, which has been, Tolly's been developing that for a very, very long time, and he seems to become the poster boy for, regen horticulture, Tolly, so bless him. We've all followed Tolly for a long time, and there's quite a lot of us trying to practice some of what he does. It's extremely complicated, some of it, but it produces incredible results. So maybe we can touch upon some of that. So first of all, Jim, he's an organic grower from, is it Evesham? Yeah, round Evesham. Has a market stall at Stroud Market, and I don't know, you have a small box scheme as well, Jim? Yep. And Guy Watson from Riverford, founder of Riverford. A lot of people will know Guy. And I think you've sort of semi-retired or something. No. Okay. None of us retire. I tried to retire, didn't work either. Okay, so who wants to go first, Jim? Or don't mind? Jim. Okay, so Jim, you go first. Thanks.
I've been a grower since about 2000, an organic grower. After a number of years working in commercial crop horticulture, following the crops around southwest, Kent and Lincoln, and some forestry work at all as well. To deal with the issue of how to bring horticulture onto a farm, if we don't do this, how are we going to feed the UK with our own fruit and veg? There are a number of ways around it. One is single crops can come in as part of a rotation. That's a relatively simple way of one horticultural crop. Share farming is another, where that single crop could be run by somebody, not the farmer, of the owner of the land. Again, that's had some long-standing success. Increasingly with regenerative farms, we're finding separate market gardens being put to one side, much smaller scale horticulture, often with no dig beds and polytunnel, quite often intensive, labour intensive, and a lot of compost. There are other ways, and I think it's an unusual arrangement I had with the landlord for nearly 20 years, where diverse small-scale horticulture can fit into a larger farm rotation that is worth a bit of a closer look. This is the area where it went with my partner's business, Horticulture Organics. We'd been in business for about 3 years when we moved to Chapel Farm. That's a very long-standing organic farm, from back before the word regenerative was being used, back before even organic was in commonplace, where it was seen as a total fringe. It was a very successful conventional arable farmer, Richard Steele, decided to take the farm organic. He saw diminishing returns coming on his farm, more inputs for less returns, and the emergence of blackgrass resistance. And essentially he saw that he was killing the soil, came to that conclusion. The soil was getting worse and worse, even though his financial returns and his cropping had been impressive. He basically brought back livestock to the farm and brought life to the soil with 6-year rotations, a 3-year fertility building grass and clover, and then 3 years arable. It was a groundbreaking farm at the time, and it spread over the hedge into a cluster of farms. I've talked to other people around the hill, and they thought, old man Steele, he lost his marbles, was a really good farmer. And they was now saying, I'll eat my hat, it's a brilliant system he brought in. And it spread over the hedge, so there's now a cluster of organic farms, from seeing what the initial one did. I moved there. It's a very small, young business of organic growing. We'd had tenancy problems. We moved at first to the farm somewhere to live. And it emerged, Adrian, who was Richard's son, said, why don't you try growing your veg here? So it wasn't a planned arrangement we had. It sort of arose out of circumstances. And what it really was 2 scales of farming working together. It's over 300 hectares, Chapel Farm, mixed arable and livestock, and also does a fair amount of contract and share farming on other farms. So it's only, on that scale, it's bigger fields with 1 or 2 species in each field, except for the lays that are about 8-10 species. On the other hand, we grow a hectare of vegetables and cut flowers with 150 varieties on it. The scales of farm you can see really clearly on the tractor. There's 350 horsepower ones going around the farm. I use an 18 horsepower Iseki that weighs in total less than not just the counterweight on the tractor, but the individual wheel weights are as heavy as the tractor I use. And it's also in different scales of outlets. All of mine's direct sales. And it's through organic marketing companies, Adrian Steele's crops grow. The arrangement, quite simply, that small cultivated area there is our growing area, and that's only a small fraction of the farm. That's just at the end of winter, a couple of springs ago. And the little white strips are our very first crops that have gone in under fleece to get some early parsley and flowers established. From the start, there was no paperwork involved in this arrangement, and often for arrangements for horticulture on farms, it's advised proper tenancies and legal agreements. Me and Adrian took the starting point. We wanted to keep it flexible. We didn't know how to work. We trusted each other, and we took it from there with fair, transparent payments. And we moved around to follow the fertility. When a clover lay was broken out, we moved our veg onto a corner of that field. We've grown on most of those fields in the photograph, and we're there for 2 years and then move on. Occasionally we've been there for 3 years. But that little patch, that's a picture of the type of cropping we bring in during the year. That it's a little patch on the field, but say the carrots under the enviromesh there, 200 square metres, that's a big patch for what I'd plant at once. I'll do them 3 or 4 times a year. Onions, 400 square metres, and squash, perhaps the biggest crop area. Some of them, it's 200 lettuce at a time to keep a succession every fortnight, so really small area. Little patches of rocket and radish, cut flowers in the middle. About 150 varieties in all in that area. It's productive. We expect about 30 tonnes of vegetables per area, per hectare, including a lot of greens and beans. And the variety, the biodiversity of our cropping does lead to a real increase in biodiversity in the field. Even in the middle of a cluster of organic farms, and we're next to a triple SI on Breeden Hill, the biodiversity goes up where the horticulture is. With the cut flowers and companion planting in green manures like the Phacelia and Limnanthus, we get concentrations of butterflies in the crops, the same as the flowering field margins that have been put for wildlife. There's that type of insect activity in the specific habitat areas outside other crops, right in the middle of our cropping. House martins bring their young out to train them in foraging, it's so insect rich. Also for larger species, the squash looks like a monochrome green, but underneath it, it's really good habitat for hares. I've nearly bust my ankle a couple of times in the scrapes that they put underneath them. Even find species like wrens actually rearing their young in the middle of the crop, using the structure of the flowers as well as the food supply. It's almost all sold direct and very fresh to the customer. The benefits of a system like this, and the problems of following a big rotation on small scale. For me, my partner, it was a secure livelihood. Not easy to find housing, affordable housing when you work in farming in Worcestershire. Secure livelihood with trust in our landlord. Fertility, I didn't have to put all the work into managing my own lays or managing green manures or compost. It was there by following the clover rotation. And it brought economies of scale because of my landlord's machinery. The fertility was dealt with, and also initial cultivations. I didn't have to carry that scale machinery and could just run on a 18 horsepower tractor. So after the initial cultivations, all the work, I get by on about 5 litres of diesel a week. The problem is permanent crops don't fit in with it. And there's also a problem of facilities. I grew without any polytunnels or protected cropping there. That suited me quite well because I'd have a cut-off at Christmas to go and do forestry work to take a break from veg. Irrigation can be a problem with moving about, but there's ways around that. My way around it was to use a no irrigation system on the heavy soil. Occasional losses, but it saved me a lot of work and got some really good results in dry summers just because of the health of the soil without irrigation. So there are these minor problems, but if I'd have really wanted to, could have found a way around it. Could have come to arrangements with Adrian about somewhere to site a polytunnel and somewhere to grow perennial crops. But it worked right for me without doing that. There's a slight problem between the arable side and establishing the lays and horticulture. Generally, all the sowing's going to be done in autumn for the main farm crops. For us, not much we overwintered. Bit of spring greens, garlic and broad beans, but otherwise everything else would be spring sown. So to get the whole field cultivated, it meant I was always leaving it bare over winter before the first year we were there. but the fertility levels were really good, and it was always rebuilt with 3 years coming back. For example, on fertility levels, onions, well, we were somewhere for a third year. So what we're following 2 years of spelt cropping, got 2.5 tonnes of onions out of 400 square metres, which comes out at about 50 tonnes a hectare. And as a third crop, that's an enormously productive one compared to a third arable. And it was in the range of the target crop for conventional onion growers. And there are all the wider benefits of environment and landscape. The question does arise, what's in it for the farmer? I did think a few times, what is Adrian really getting out of this? I'm getting loads out of it. He wasn't losing. He was getting a fair rent, a fair return. Bit of extra skills and security on the farm with the extra eyes. But I think the real thing he gained is the farm was moving in the direction that he wanted it to move. That it was producing a wider range for local families to eat and of more people working on the land. Built up links and different possibilities for his farm. We did miss opportunities. We were hoping from the outset to have joint crops on a bigger scale, of sort of single crops, putting my knowledge of veg together with his knowledge of the local soils and his kit. But somehow we couldn't find it at the right scale. To grow one crop in all his fields, in any one of his fields, would have meant we'd have been looking for a supermarket supply as an outlet, and neither of us wanted to do that. He'd tried it in the past with potatoes and grown really good crops. He'd been badly stung by their buying practices. But one question I'd like to ask to move on is, where have all the growers gone? Now that slide just looks like a normal everyday field. It's in Hazelaw Lane, that's between the farm and Evesham. It's for about 1.5 miles. And all that normal field, within living memory, was solid market gardening from one end of the road to the other, where hundreds of people were earning their living. And that was the landscape round the Vale of Evesham, feeding Birmingham and much of the rest of the Midlands and the West Country. 10 miles away, 100 years back, there was a 600-acre orchard and the biggest canning factory in the country for plums, major plum growing area, trainloads of pickers coming down from Birmingham to pick the crops. It was huge. Throughout the local area, horticulture was one of the main employers. As the horticulture and agriculture has been industrialised and the supermarkets have grown, that's been swept away over the decades. And rising land prices and national and local policies have really hammered the nail into the coffin of horticulture. The 95 Tenancies Act really worked against any long-term projects like that. And right to buy, lack of social housing, rising prices, second homes have all pushed out people who would be working in horticulture. Been recently actually moving to a plot nearby that I'll be share farming with Adrian and building a house there. All the local skilled trades, about 70-80% of the people who worked on the house came from market gardening families. They all remember it as their first job at school or helping out their dad or their granddad. And it's just gone. The local markets have gone. There's a couple of big salad growers nearby. And even the training's gone. Pershore College, that's about 1 mile away from where I am now. There's a number of really good growers have gone through it. It's closed down its section of organic horticulture, and for any sort of productive horticulture, it's stopped doing as well. It's just gone over to landscape and amenity horticulture. And there's been a total de-skilling in horticulture. Things like tree pruning, systems being developed are just done with a flail now. And they're hardly trees. It's not doesn't strike me as sustainable fruit tree growing, when it's trees that only live about 10 years. They won't take their own weight. They have to be grown on a wire and post system. And all these skills for horticulture have been lost. And I even notice it now in some videos of really good-looking agroecological and regenerative small farms. It drives me mad seeing picking fruit and planting fruit, of people doing it, the holding looks beautiful, loads of wildlife. Somebody's using the ball of their foot rather than the heel to firm it in. It's a basic bit I was always taught on planting fruit trees. You don't do that. You're squashing too much out of the soil. Really basic first thing, and now see it's just forgotten. See people that close up to the camera of somebody picking an apple, and they got their fingers round it. And they're pulling it off and thinking, oh yeah, that looks a lovely photo. That's going to be bruised tomorrow. That's not high quality produce. You've grown a good crop and ruined it picking it. Nobody's taken it in their palm and lifted it off. Basic horticultural skills. They've just disappeared. And the trade of horticulture has been devalued. I saw recently forestry complaining about it. It's seen as the thicko option in the countryside. That's why, if you haven't got the brains or the ability to stick at anything else, you can always go work in forestry. And there's the same attitude towards horticulture as well. It's been devalued as it's been de-skilled, partly to do with as the countryside's got wealthier, less and less people willing to work in horticulture. And it's a skilled trade. To do it properly, you need to be master of a few trades and jack of quite a number of them. There's also been the benefit that there's quite some really capable and highly intelligent people working in it who are missed by the education system and written off as stupid because they weren't diagnosed as with dyslexia or autism or something like that. And they've actually found somewhere for their talents when they've been written off. And so really to bring this horticulture back into the landscape starts on the ground at farm level. It's been so decimated. One of the first things farmers need to think about is to finding room at farm level to bring in healthy produce for local people from healthy ecosystems. So they're all different arrangements, and I'm sure there are many more possible arrangements than I've touched on here for how horticulture can have a room on a farm, and it will bring benefits. And on top of that, to make a real change, we will need to go further. Farmers can't do that by ourselves. There will need to be local and national support. The issue of access to land with rising prices, how that's going to be sorted, and also the housing for the people who are going to work there, on-site accommodation, or where are local people who work on the harvest going to live. We'll need training and technical support. That's a big part of what the OGA is trying to do, is to pool technical knowledge for organic horticulture and make it freely available. We need people to look at developing short supply chains and local economies so we can get our produce straight to consumers. And I think one of the big things we need is actually recognising the value of horticulture. There's a lot of lip service to it that comes from national and local policies, but don't really see government putting its money where its mouth is, to actually saying, yeah, we need good horticulture. Here's the money to support it. Here's the money for the training. These are policies that allow you access to land and markets. And recognition of it as something that shouldn't just be cheap labour or thought of as get the cheapest food at the cheapest food no matter what the cost in human and environmental terms. But it's a skilled job. It's actually important for the health of the population. It needs to be done properly and actually valued, the trade of horticulture in organic and regenerative systems.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Just before Guy, I'm going to just gazump Guy just slightly because Jim has sort of stimulated me to just talk very, very briefly for about a minute about the Organic Growers Alliance and what we do. So one of the things we are really attempting to do is bring more training, and Jim alluded to that in his talk. And I spoke to Andrew Burgess today, who's one of the biggest organic growers in the country. And Andrew just told me that Burgess have cut their production by 15% just because of labour alone this year and the lack of skilled workers out there. So I think when we call ourselves the voice of organic horticulture, what we're trying to model is that, you know, there are good jobs out there, but we do need to train people up. I mean, I struggled. I advertised recently for a job where I'm working at the moment, and I didn't get anyone that could drive a tractor. I ended up getting one dairy farmer's son, and he's now brilliant. But, you know, I'm having to train him really, really quickly in 6 months, which is almost impossible. But, you know, that's the sort of thing we're having to do. So we're really lobbying DEFRA hard on training, and that's one of the jobs that the Organic Growers Alliance is really doing is we have a representative role within sort of, you know, the policy that's being made at the moment. And as we all know, you know, we've got a massive change going on in agriculture and horticultural policy and support. Often small growers don't get any support whatsoever. I think I used to get about 2,000 from, the last lot of EU money, but that was on about 30 acres, and that's just on land alone. But if you're on 3 acres, which a lot of holdings are on very small acreages or hectareages, you don't get anything, basically. There is a 5-hectare rule, which I won't go on about, but we're trying to lobby to get that taken away at the moment because, 5 hectares is actually quite a lot of horticulture, frankly. For a small grower, that's a lot of horticulture. So we're trying to get that taken away so there can be some support for horticulture on a small scale. Thanks for that, Guy. Thank you for indulging me.
Okay. I thought I'd just talk you through my 35 years of horticulture, where I have experimented with various different models of land ownership, management, and so on. So I came back to my dad's tenanted farm in 1986 and started growing vegetables on the only decent field in the farm, 3 acres out of 500, and started selling to shops and then wholesalers and then supermarkets and then the box scheme, which we're known for today. And so I was fitting into a dairy farm, essentially, with a slightly disgruntled brother who sometimes I think would have been happier if I hadn't come home. But it worked pretty well, I think, fitting in vegetables into, obviously having the benefit of the muck from the cows and so on. Really not vegetable land other than that one field. And as we got bigger, we got pushed further and further up the farm towards the moor, onto the thinner and thinner, steeper and steeper ground, until in the end I went and bought my own farm. But so the problem with horticulture, I started on a very small scale, being very kind to the soil, as I think Jones does. But as we got bigger and the machinery got bigger, I'm afraid, modern horticulture, in terms of the soil, is a disaster. And it doesn't matter whether it's organic, actually. I mean, it may be better. You're not putting the chemicals on. Maybe the manure and compost is helping. But the excessive cultivation is a complete disaster. I mean, all salads are grown with bed formers. All roots are, de-stoned soil, normally bed formed as well. I mean, what chance does an earthworm or a mycorrhizal fungi have after you've been through with that sort of equipment? And machinery just keeps getting bigger and bigger. I started off with a 30 horsepower tractor, and then we got up to 100 horsepower tractors, and they weren't big enough, so we brought the contractors in who, it's a 250 horsepower tractor, which was just about squeezed down the lane, and they cause all the compaction, so then you have to plough deeper in subsoil, and we are into this spiral of I really say pretty bad management, which the soil only forgives by virtue of being put back to grass and clover, for 3 or 4 years, and when it recovers, and then it comes back in again, and the first year or two it's fairly resilient, and by year 3, if anything, if you have a wet year or whatever, those are the fields where you start. So large-scale horticulture is a disaster for the soil. The only, those of you who were with Henry Dimbleby's lecture, apparently we only account for half the size of Orkneys. So it's probably not that significant. I think that probably excludes potatoes, I should imagine, from those figures, which are probably the very worst crop for the soil. So it got bigger and bigger, and I did then, we started the veg box scheme. That really took off through the 90s and 2000s, and I went out around the country trying to persuade other people that they should adopt the Riverford model, and would have some sort of umbrella organisation which would help them in marketing and accounting and share technical knowledge and so on. And no one was interested, basically, apart from the Burgess brothers, actually, who were just out-and-out businessmen and sharks. And after about 5 years, I think we decided, I asked them, where do you want to be in 15 years' time? And they said, on a Caribbean island with our feet up. At which point I said, oh dear, I should have asked you that question before we started. And they tried to buy us out. That didn't work, and we ended up buying them out. But it was very clear that we weren't going to work together, which was a sensible way to end the relationship. I spent a lot of time driving around Kent trying to persuade people that they might, that this was a great opportunity around the, those lovely peaty soils between Liverpool and Manchester. And I spent a lot of time talking to farmers, and they just, not interested. Because I suppose horticulture was seen as, well, I mean, the supermarkets were screwing everyone by then, and there were just a few intermediate good growers left. But most of them just wanted to retire, really, and yeah, so the whole thing didn't work. We did actually set up 4 satellites, 2 of which kind of failed, and we ended up with the one in Peterborough and the one down in Devon. And then 4 years ago, I'm probably pointing out all the bad stuff. I'm actually immensely proud of what we've achieved together, but not the soil management. Actually, I completely, there is wonderful biodiversity above ground, and you do get that with vegetables, especially organic vegetables, because there's so many weeds, and and that's mostly that's mostly, especially in perennial vegetables, that's mostly what the wildlife likes. And the reason really no one wants to get into horticulture, and actually who here does grow vegetables commercially? I mean, even on a relatively small scale? Yeah, not a lot. I assume that some of you are marginally interested in the idea, which I'm probably putting you off fairly quickly. If you're growing vegetables, your sales, roughly 50% of them are going to go in labour. Depends what you're growing, how you do it, and whatever. At Riverford, it's marginally over 50%. If you're on potatoes and so on, it'll be a little under 50. That's a hell of a lot of people to manage on these intensive crops. I went away for a month, came back a fortnight ago, and within 24 hours, I had 1 member of staff crying on my kitchen table. Then there were 2 more, and then 2 days later, we had a barbecue, and about 11 o'clock, 3 more of them descended on me after I had a few beers and told me how miserable it was and how they hated the supervisor. And you have to deal with these problems about managing human relationships, and it's bloody hard work, which is why most businesses most vegetable businesses are specialists, and they have a rig pushing 30 people up the road, none of whom will be English nationals. It's just a bloody horrible business, that scale of agriculture. Actually supplying a supermarket, if that's going to supply a supermarket, that is what it's going to be like. And it is bloody miserable, and I don't think anyone should be running that sort of business. While I was away, I visited one of our suppliers near Saragossa in Spain, and he had 4 rigs, each pushing 30 people up the field picking broccoli. It costs about half as much to employ someone in Spain as it does here, but that wasn't cheap enough. So everyone in that field was Moroccan. And that is the reality of horticulture on a large scale. Is bloody miserable, and we just shouldn't be doing it. Creating this underclass of people working in the most miserable conditions, so I don't think that's what we're talking about here, is it?
I'll balance you out in a minute. That our team is not miserable.
Right.
We actually are quite happy in the field.
That is large-scale horticulture, and it's bloody horrible. And at times we have got dangerously close to it at Riverford and have retracted into a way that I think we have got it at a scale where the employment practices are pretty good, and I'm pretty proud of what goes on there. But anyway, it became employee-owned 4 years ago, and I kind of waltzed off into the sunset. Well, not quite. I do still technically work 3 days a week there. The sunset was 3 miles up the valley where I bought a farm where I thought I might have a dog and chase a few bullocks around and everything, but I just couldn't help growing vegetables. So despite the fact that it's 30% slope, some of it, I'm back growing vegetables. And I seem to have established we've got about 10 people working there picking strawberries at the moment. And we grow lots of other crops, mainly perennial crops, which I'll come to. This kind of distress about how we were treating the soil has really led me to a great enthusiasm for beating it up less, and they're not cultivating it every year, growing perennial crops. You know, our tractor that does most of the work is now 60 horsepower, a little bit bigger than 18, but probably weighs 2 or 3 times, but it's a hell of a lot smaller than the contractors. We don't use large muck spreaders anymore. We have about a 50-year-old muck spreader that goes up the beds, spreading, well, we don't use muck either, we use compost. And it's gone back to a sort of human scale where we do actually, I mean, I have the benefit of 35 years of experience and having Riverford just down the road, who are a fantastic customer and treat us, you know, really, really well, unlike the supermarkets of old that we dealt with. And I think it's rather a lovely business. But I started meeting all these. We have a lot of freaks in Devon, lots of hippies, lots of people on the borderlines of society a bit. And I kept meeting all these people, you know, who wanted to get into growing food on a small scale. They weren't interested in this large scale production, quite right. I don't blame them. They wanted to grow small scale vegetables and other things and sell them locally. And in the end, there's a few conversations. We've ended up with what we call the Badderford Collective. With Badderford is the farm where Geety, my wife, and I now live, and we have 6 businesses there where we are trialing different and actually, to answer your last question, what's in it for the landlord? It's lovely. It's really good fun. I mean, I like, you know, having a barbecue with his people and going swimming in the reservoir and bringing life back onto a farm, which probably would have employed half a person, you know, when it was sheep and beef. The sheep and beef guy's still there on most of the land, actually, but we're just cultivating bits of it. Anyway, one of them is growing perennial vegetables, plants, which they sell to gardeners. Incredible vegetables, if anyone's interested. Absolutely, you know, the woman Mandy who runs it is a world authority on perennial vegetables. Another one, Vital Seeds, who do open pollinated kind of heirloom seeds for gardeners. We've got Sophie, who grows dye plants and runs a sort of social enterprise working with various excluded groups, making fabrics, dyeing them and doing upholstery. And Ruby, who does culinary and medicinal herbs. Aidan, who does very small-scale vegetables, which are sold to Geety, my wife's pubs, and a couple of other local shops. And they're not starry-eyed idealists, actually. They're pretty practical and sensible people. And I have a good deal of optimism that they're going to make. They're all at their... Well, actually, Vital Seeds are doing fantastically. You know, they've doubled their turnover since they came, actually probably quadrupled it. The Mandy is with the perennial vegetables. I'm pretty sure she's going to do well as well. I have some concerns about the other ones, but you know, I think by virtue of working together and having hopefully a helpful landlord, sharing information and so on, I am fairly optimistic. So I suppose it's trying another model, and it is just lovely working with them. I mean, I wouldn't do it with people who didn't have a good deal of experience, but I think we're all enjoying that. And there are a few other projects going on. I suppose I have the benefit of having sold Riverford to the staff into employee ownership and walked off with 4 million quid in my pocket. Not knowing how on earth I was going to spend all that money. I'm doing quite well over it, actually. Getting rid of it quite quickly. A fair bit of it has gone on planting agroforestry, so we plant a lot of walnuts and hazelnuts on these ridiculously steep slopes. Haven't quite worked out how I'm going to harvest them. And I think I've probably said enough, haven't I? I hope there are going to be some questions. I hope that's not too miserable. I love growing vegetables. Yeah. I've been doing it for 35 years, and I love it every bit. In fact, I love it more than when I started. But the actual reality of it is that it is bloody hard work. And sorry, I'm going to go on a little bit longer. What's driven these changes? Why is it? Well, clearly the supermarkets, they don't want to buy off small growers. So that's driven this concentration to some extent. You know, the relentless downward pressure on prices, you can only do that if you get specialised and you get the equipment. And actually, the thing that's neglected quite a lot is knowledge. You know, the big guys have got more knowledge and technical expertise. You can't get away from that. However, you know, fundamentally, if you're growing a hand-picked crop, and a lot of it is, you know, courgettes, I won't say lettuces, but strawberries, you know, perennial veg, we grow massive cardoons and artichokes and things. All these, and there's no real economies of scale. I mean, you know, once you planted them, you know, most of the work is, there's no economies of scale. There's no reason why they shouldn't be done on a small scale, not intrinsically. It's to do with the these kind of infrastructure around it and the sales and so on, yeah, quite a lot to do with knowledge, which we could get over a lot if we were better at sharing knowledge in this country. I actually also have a farm in France where you have a brilliant group of local growers that we share knowledge with, and they do seem to be much, much better at it. They are better supported by their government. I will sit down now. Thanks.
Guy, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'm just going to pick... Just before we throw it open to the room and hopefully get some questions, I'm just going to pick Guy up on one thing. He wrote a very provocative article once called Big is Beautiful, and it was like challenging us small growers. He basically told us all to retire, and I can see that he's changed. He's a changed man. So, I still think we've got a place for small growers. We've got a place for, as Guy said, there's a lot of issues around large-scale horticulture. However,
I have written a lot more critical articles about large-scale growers.
Good you said that. Thank you. But that one sticks in my mind because I'm a small-scale grower. So it depends. I mean, obviously, scale is all relative. I mean, I would say 30 acres. I was on a 1,200-acre farm, and that fitted in very well. I won't talk about it too much, but I would like to say that I didn't move around like Jim did, and that had its benefits as well because I had irrigation from the river. I had packing shed. I had a lot of support from the farm. If we needed the Manitou to make compost with, I could use the Manitou. So, being on a larger farm, not moving around also has its benefits. I would say that there are lots and lots of models, as Jim has alluded to, So, that's a sort of really good mix there. So I think it would be lovely to hear what anyone's got to say. So I'm just going to, the lady at the back with a hand up. Okay, is there a microphone coming? No, it's coming. Thank you.
Okay. Hi. I'm just interested in terms of the access to land point of view. What is it particularly? Because I hear a lot about larger farmers being quite interested in allowing smaller scale horticulture onto their farms. And I know through being part of the Land Workers Alliance that there are a lot of people wanting to get into smaller scale growing. And I've even heard that there are actually more farmers wanting to share their land than there are people wanting to do the growing. That's what I've heard in some cases. So my question is, what does the panel think is the barrier to larger scale landowners, farmers, actually, what's stopping this, what could be a brilliant synergistic system of big and small coming together? What would you say are the barriers to that actually becoming a reality?
Spiritual impoverishment, I would say. If you're a landowner and maybe even if you have a land agent and someone wants to come onto your land and doing something, you're going to want some tenancy agreement, which means that you can get rid of them if you need to sell the farm or put solar panels on, start trading carbon, or you need that sort of flexibility. And of course, a grower coming onto a farm, especially if they're going to plant fruit trees or something, they want a long-term. So I think that kind of narrow-minded, money's everything approach, is a barrier. However, that is not human nature. That's just how people have been trained to think by their neighbours and their bank managers and accountants and so on. If you can tap into, I think most people actually want to help other people, and you sort of got to get around the back of them and find that soft spot somehow. And
just to balance that out, the landlords that me and Jim have had, and that I know that Tolly's got, and many growers within the Land Workers Alliance as well, but within Organic Growers Alliance have brilliant landlords. So yes, Guy's right, of course. But when I was here last year, I had 5 big farms come up to me, asking me, they weren't organic, by the way, and they came up and said, yeah, they are definitely there, absolutely, and there are some fantastic landowners out there, frankly, and that's why we put this on, Jim, you go.
I think there's probably also not sufficient people who are already trained and learn how to get a business up and running. Have learned, who are quite ready. So that is one problem. And I think another is that there's not enough of a conversation between bigger agriculture and horticulture, that it's often thought of as two separate worlds. It's certainly often treated like that by policy. And really just need more time of farmers and growers together, talking with each other, actually rebuilding rural communities locally and nationally. Awkward side is most places there aren't the growers there any longer. But
yeah, I mean, you do have to be appealing to something else in the landlord, because we're talking about a couple of acres for one of these intensive things. I mean, one of our tents only got a quarter of an acre. Well, even if I charged her £400 an acre, which I think is the upper end of what you'd pay to grow commercial vegetables on grade 1 soils, I think it's probably about that. It would be £100. Well, it's not worth writing on a bit of paper so I don't charge them anything for the land, because it's an irrelevance to me, and it would be to most people. So there has to be some other reason. For some people, it's they've got a farm shop or something and they want produce to sell in it. I hear that as being quite a common one. I think Napa State we're looking at that, and that's. But even that, I do think, I think you have to be tapping into this feeling of people wanting to be part of the solution. They want to be part of shaping a better world. And as they've found with their landlords, there are plenty of people like that. We just have to get over this sort of barrier that everything has to be about money. Because let's face it, these are rich people anyway, aren't they? I mean, £100 isn't going to make any difference to them. So.
It's just coming.
Offering them free vegetables would be quite a good one, actually.
Thanks. So you've made a very good case for it being entirely irrational to be here. and I think, I'm here because I want to be part of the solution. And my husband and I have some land and we're looking for a tenant. And we've been advised by Marina of the Apricot Centre, who my daughter's studying with and who swims in your reservoir, that 10 acres, and Jyoti Fernandez said that 10 acres is about the right amount. Marina's started to draw some kind of a contract up, but because I know nothing about horticulture, I mean, I think we're prepared to take a bit of a risk and build a relationship. And are there any clues to give me about where to go or how to find these people or how to get a good contract and a good relationship going with somebody that I can trust?
Well, you're starting at a good place with the Apricot Centre and Marina, but I mean, I think someone said that there was more of a paucity of growers than there was of land, but I think that is probably true. So we do need to train more people. And I think I think the kind of bridging between someone who's done something at Schumacher or the Apricot Centre or perhaps out of a more conventional college, and often they need to be the edges knocked off them a little bit before they actually go and start making their own mistakes. I think going and working for someone on a reasonable scale is a good option, and then a year or two of that, and then they're ready to take on an opportunity like yours. How to look for them, other than what I've just said, yeah.
Well, we could start looking at that. We've got a lot of things to look at in the Organic Growers Alliance, but that could be one of the things, matchmaking. I mean, this could come out. This could be something that's kind of come out of this particular session, I guess. But we need to go back, and we've got a lot of other issues that we're dealing with at the moment. But certainly, what Guy's saying is really good advice. But, I think the Organic Growers Alliance could facilitate some of that. And I might be speaking out of turn, but I'd like to think that, we can go back and actually have these ideas between the directors and say, what is our next mission? And our next mission really should be to produce more growers and then match them up with the land. So land access is a massive issue, obviously, but maybe that's what the Organic Growers Alliance could facilitate. Yeah. I think we haven't got time to talk about that now, but that's a very interesting model that's starting to develop. And I've had something to do with Food 1200. It's very interesting. Any more questions, Ben?
So we've talked about this shortage of growers, and what I guess I've noticed over the years is that lots of people really want to be growers, and they go woofing, or they do a bit of volunteering, or they get some seasonal work, and then there's jobs being offered but everyone wants a grower, so there's some really good growing jobs, and they can't find someone with 10 years experience, so they take on this person with 2 or 3 years experience, and quite often they get overwhelmed and they get disheartened, and they maybe feel that they haven't got what it takes, whereas actually they might well have had what it takes with the right support. So how do we ensure that this sort of, using a word, groundswell of some enthusiasm from young people wanting to come into horticulture, how do we make sure that they succeed after that initial period?
There were steps in that direction jointly with the OGA and the Land Works Alliance for a mentoring programme. Thanks. Hope you heard that. But that was only a pilot one. That's definitely mentoring needs to be developed, but also just grower groups around the country, whether it's through any national organisation or locally, because we can build organic and agroecological horticulture. Building local networks will make all the difference for people to get through those early times. We've seen in things like when COVID broke out, which totally disrupted everybody's supply chain. It was either pretty much the small organic growers hit a cliff with no outlets going overnight, or of a huge surge. It depends on whether you were supplying shops and restaurants or supplying a box scheme. And the areas that reacted best to sort of reorganise were the ones with good local networks already existing. And I think it's the same for early growers. In that after 2-3 years, the better local networks we can give, where growers are regularly meeting each other, talking through problems, and somebody's been doing it for 2-3 years, doesn't think, oh God, this is the end of the world, how do I cope with it? And all the other growers who've been around say, oh, it happens every year or every other year. You get used to it, don't worry about it. Yeah, that's life as a grower. Just that type of conversation, and rebuilding basically the rural community of people who actually work the land.
Yeah, I suppose that's why most of us old growers are not going to be able to retire. So I tried retiring. It's not going to happen. So a lot of us have come back out of retirement because of COVID, I think. And people like Tolly who give amazing advice. I mean, he seems to be, the man of the moment, in terms of the Monbiot sort of theory. And we've all been following Tolly for the last 25 years. So and have had a lot of amazing results on the back of some of his experiments. But I think we have a duty. My wife keeps saying, you can't give up. You've got to pass that knowledge on. And that's not arrogance. That's just purely that we do have a lot of knowledge. Guy's got 30 years, more probably experience, 35, I think he said. Tolly's got 40. And Tolly is never going to give up, as far as I'm aware. He's just going to be there forever. So, bless him. So, any more questions quickly? We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. Yes, sir. Sir, here. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. It seems hard to square the circle in a way from what we heard this morning about the food policy from Henry and Dibbleby about the need to promote local horticulture. And that was one of the few things the government seems to have got on board with, don't they? So is this now, the need to grow more locally and substitute for imports, is this now an opportunity to be more in sync with government, or is this an agenda for pushing horticulture down more glass houses to grow peppers with gas? Opportunity or not?
Actually, I think the real commercial opportunity is in something intermediate. I mean, I was slightly pulling out my hair about the strawberry situation, having got back, and I found myself on the phone to a consultant from Kent. And actually, anyway, sort of on the route to that conversation, I spoke to another consultant who worked for Anderson's, and he said he worked mainly within horticulture. And he says the successful, and I think by successful he meant commercially successful businesses, were not the large businesses, and they were not the small businesses. They were the kind of intermediate ones, the ones that had a real eye and attention for detail. His idea of an intermediate business was, I think it was 30 hectares of strawberries. So I would put the bar, but I mean, a hectare of strawberries, you could have a group of people growing a hectare of strawberries, and maybe each at the peak of the season, having 5 local people, some of whom might be friends and family members, and those things are, that's real social capital. I think, that really benefits an area. But you then, if you're just growing strawberries or a limited range of stuff, which you then can be good at, you need to have a different route to market to the one that most people are talking about. With most small-scale growers, they want to supply, well, typically a box scheme, and Pia will agree with me, disagree with me on this one, but I mean, running a small box scheme is bloody difficult. It is really difficult, even with level of experience that Peter and Jim have. It's really hard to do things at that level, and make minimum wage and a little bit more, and be able to go on holiday now and then, and not end up with your wife leaving you, which is what I think, or your husband in some case.
Really good question. Can we get one more question, or maybe one or two?
Cutting me off.
5 minutes to go. Well done. 5 minutes, yeah, we've got 5 minutes. So maybe 2 more questions. We can be brief.
It's really interesting to hear you talk and the experiences. Thank you very much for being very honest and very straightforward. As somebody who's interested, landowner in North Norfolk, keen to start market garden, get the local community more involved in the farming practice. We're involved in Leaf and the Open Farm Sunday, hoping to do much more engagement. I suppose what I'm taking away from today is that, can we really wait for government action on this? I mean, I just feel that we have a disconnect in our village right now. If we lose any more local residents and any more second home come in, we will lose yet another village school. And that, we can go back to the 1980s, and we lost several schools then. We have now 2 in the local area. How do we bring people when the infrastructure is not there? It's only there when the whole place is swarming with summer visitors. But what about the rest of the year when we need people to be working the land? How do we get them to stay? And we can't wait another 10 years for government to filter that down to the local government. It needs to be now. It needs to be done by us. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we do it as private persons?
On-farm accommodation is pretty critical. I mean, certainly sounds like your area. I mean, South Devon is just ridiculous now, trying to find people on minimum wage, trying to find somewhere to live. So, I think being able to offer on-farm accommodation at some reasonable return on what it costs you to convert that barn, as opposed to what you could sell it to, which, again, I would hope that these are mostly fairly rich people that would be happy to do. I met a couple of people here today that are doing that sort of thing. So, so accommodation is important. I mean, it can be a caravan. It does work. Some people are happy living in caravans. I bought Peter's shepherd's hut off him. Yeah, we've got 2 living in it, actually. When we go on holiday, we move into our house. But yeah, accommodation's very important, and that can be. I think caravans are okay at a certain stage in your life, but I think really we've got to be aspiring to something better than that. For the summer, yeah.
Just one more. Can we have one more? Yes, sorry. There you go.
Just going back to Guy's point about the soil, and I guess we're a medium to small scale growers, and we use ploughing and power harrowing, which isn't ideal for the soil. But I just didn't know if you know of people who successfully don't plough, use minimum cultivation.
In field scale?
In field scale, in the medium scale production.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to talk about, going about power harrowing, but there are people starting to experiment with alley cropping and things like that. Andy Dibben at Abbey Home Farm is starting to experiment with that. And we are starting to have a conversation about minimum till in vegetables. It's bloody difficult, I have to say. Excuse my language, but it is extremely difficult. I've thought about it. I've thought about training my guy, sort of in no dig outside, but. A lot of young growers are going no dig outside. It's not going to be large scale. It's much smaller. I think
all our equipment is geared up, like the planter and the weeding machine. It's all geared up for a dead level, a very clean surface. So that's why we have to play. But there must be a technique to do it. And I thought we need research.
I think we as the Organic Growers Alliance are looking at these things all the time. So yeah, it's a good question, and I'd like to have over a pint in the bar.
Yeah, I think there is a sort of sensible medium, which is not a 250 horsepower tractor. It's, I think actually the discipline of not having a tractor more than 60 horsepower working on 1.8 metre beds meant that, you just couldn't go more than about 4 inches.
My driver would leave if I gave him a...
Well, that is also a problem as well.
One more, or just one more? This gentleman here.
I think we're all using machinery which is way bigger than we need to, and the cost saving is tiny, but I don't know whether some sort of machismo that we carry on doing it. I don't know.
I'd just add tread lightly where we can, with cover crops that you can perhaps be frost killed and plant straight into disking instead of ploughing where possible, but just what's possible.
Just very briefly, I read really excitedly about, or really interestedly about your co-ownership or the co-owners at Riverford, and it's fantastic to hear you using some of that money that you took out of the business, I suppose, to reinvest in the future of horticulture. And I just wondered if there was any left over, maybe for an investment in sort of precision fermentation. Would you be?
I knew that was coming. We tried to keep off that subject. Can we go down the bar?
That's what I deserve for bragging about how much money I got in my trousers, isn't it?
Well, on that note, that's brilliant. I thought we'd kept off the controversial subjects really well, but and that is a really interesting ending point, actually, because George, bless him, love him or hate him, and I tend to love him because he's a controversial journalist, and we need those controversial journalists. But he brings Tolly on the one hand of the spectrum, with his sort of green manures and this fantastic system of the way. Well, Tolly's just been there forever, and then this whole thing about fermentation on the other. So how we square those, I really don't know, but it's a fascinating subject. Thank you, everyone. It's been really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.